Well, I mean, I don't know how well I begin. This is sort of fresh in my head about how to articulate it, just based on the conversations we were having. Um, but I think indigenous sort of behavior management all entailed um, the idea of building the character and the personality of the child and how that child relates to its environment. And so the the model of a Hogan was used in that every time there were specific guidelines that help the child develop character and ethics within that space. So, for example, obviously the door opens to the east, which is related to the cosmos and is related to the earth. And then when the child enters the Hogan, they have to go clockwise. And the reason why is that in this hemisphere, everything turns clockwise. Even the shadows move in a clockwise direction. And so the idea is you want the child to move with life rather than against it. And so that is uh, um, an essential in walking into a Hogan, ashabakel, in that they always go clockwise. Um, there are exceptions; they can go backwards, but they always start out clockwise in that form. And then the words spoken for the child is required to sit and observe and listen. This is the place in the Hogan is more for stillness and observation. So it requires the child to the to take time to listen and sit still and observe and watch and listen carefully and not passively. Um, you're constantly sort of critiquing and analyzing the situation because those whatever forms of text, stories, songs that are presented in the Hogan are going to be referred back to when you're actually moving outside of it. So outside of the Hogan is where you're physically sort of active. Um, and those concepts that are learned in the Hogan are taken outside of the. And so simple things like the fire and the, the stick they use to poke the fire, the ashes and everything, they call that Honeshkish. Honeshkish is like the grandpa, and so they personified it, and that anytime that Honeshkish is there, you show respect in that environment. And so the idea, based on talking to one of the Pueblo sort of faculty, Mr. Silva, he said that they put a prayer feather on the doorway when you enter the building. For us, we put the Hunishkish by the door, and it represents a very similar thing. And so the idea was that if we put a prayer feather or a Hunishkish or both at the school, the doorways of the school, and we explain this to the students, and then there's a more meaningful sort of, the space is more meaningful. It has a spiritual sort of foundation, and then you tell the students, are you acting in a way in front of those items? Are you acting the way you're supposed to? Or you refer back to it. You're not supposed to say that in front of those prayer feathers, in front of that Honeshkish. And that's always been a form of discipline for us. When you're around that fire, you don't speak in that way. And so the idea is that these were essential tools that were going to be part of all of their homes as they grew older, and essential tools that they would use when they leave the Hogan. They take the fire with them, which is inside of them. So when they're born, they put that heat inside of them with that Hunishkish. So regardless of whether they're out there, they don't physically have that thing, it's still with them if it was done in that manner. So that's behavior management inside the Hogan. So I'm looking, if you begin to make the space of a school like that, where inside the classroom is a time for contemplation and thought and planning and analysis and creativity, then you have those items with it it allows them to sort of monitor their own behavior, but it also gives them meaningful sort of understanding of why they should be acting that way. And then the references of whatever they're learning ideally should be implemented when they leave the classroom or the Hogan, and they enact it, they design it, they're physically moving outside of that Hogan with those concepts. So that's kind of how I began to understand it. I don't know if that, I hope that helps.